Cameron Watson. I am the artistic director of Boom, and we are so excited to have you here for Boom Forum Volume 4. And this is going to be a deep dive discussion, and I'm so excited to share this time and space with you virtually. For the moment, we're going to focus in our conversation, and I am just so excited to hear from Hannah and True Lobster and Troy. And real quick, thank you to our sponsors, Knight Foundation, Re-Emprise Fund, Foundation for the Carolinas, United Way of Central Carolinas, North Carolina Arts Council, and the ASC. We are delighted to be in partnership with these organizations for our full virtual season this year. So without further ado, let's get started. Troy, take it away.
Thank you very much. I'm Troy Copeland. I earned my MFA in creative writing from West Virginia University. I teach full-time at the Oconee campus of the University of North Georgia based in Dahlonega. And I'm also the featured writer and copy editor for Highlight Magazine of Athens, Georgia, where I reside. In addition to creative nonfiction and fiction, I've spent a career prioritizing literary criticism and philosophy as part of a basis for instruction and practice. So in today's interview, I will be moderating and mediating a conversation featuring 3 incredible artists in the Charlotte area, because their work reflects professional aesthetics that may seem different to the point of extremes, but are actually very similar in aim. My chosen critical lens for much of this discussion is Jungian psychoanalytical in character. At its core, Jungian psychoanalysis is a pursuit of personal and social wholeness and wellness through first acknowledging and then integrating the range of complex and often conflicting potentials that together make us human. Often called individuation, this process, this journey or pursuit, is thought to be inherently creative. It perceives the artist, both consciously and unconsciously, building bridges between personal experiences and shared social, largely unconscious potentials. How constellating these potentials defines, resists, and creates privilege is a big part of what I'm excited to hear Hannah Hassan, Karina Caparino, and MB Nix discuss tonight. And now we'll hear from our artists, starting with True Lobster, Karina Caparino, and MB Nix.
Hello, world, Zoom world. I'm Karina Caparino, and this is MB Nix. That is the last time we're going to say those names, probably. Together, we are True Lobster Charlotte, a creative duo that offers critique, collaboration, and contemporary performance in and around the Charlotte area. How we function. We have very different lived experiences, but we both share a reverence for storytelling. We develop stories from the same imaginative space and are particularly drawn to contradictions and the existence of multiple truths. We sort of stumbled into this forum through our work with the show that we've been developing over the last year and some change called I, Daughter, Monster. It was supposed to be a small, intimate production where, it was a shared breath between actor and audience. Obviously, and it was supposed to be spring, summer 2020. So obviously that is not happening, at least for the foreseeable future. So we've put a pause on that version of I, Daughter, Monster. And in the world of I, Daughter, Monster has something we've been exploring for a number of years in different forms. If any of you saw 2019 Boom, T was sort of our first public showing of this world we've been building. So it sort of made sense for us to transition I, Daughter, Monster and this world in this 2020 COVID world into an audio production. So yes, that is the first part of the lens of where we're coming from. Now, I, Daughter, Monster. I, Daughter, Monster is now is an audio show that will be premiering January-ish. It's a show that explores the inner world of a young girl in the South as she navigates the tension between her own sense of self and the narratives the world puts upon her. And through this loose structure, we explore how white women in particular both experience and perpetuate violence, and how this liminal space sort of reinforces existing power structures. So that is the primary lens from which we are speaking from. I think that there is a clip of an in-progress recording of an interlude in I, Daughter, Monster, which sort of sets up the world of the play. It's not necessarily a linear narrative whatsoever. But in this clip, the young girl navigates the rigidity of the patriarchal narrative, and it is put in contrast to the monster, which you might remember from T, sort of her playful interjections. So, Cameron.
Once upon too many times, there lived a man with his wife and daughter. Though they had other names, the man called his wife Good and his daughter Beautiful.
Oh, sir, your daughter's pie is simply wonderful.
They lived together in a small yellow house with a white fence and a smooth gate leading to an old, old path. The man was proud to spend his nights with Good, and he delighted in being woken each morning by Beautiful.
How did you get such a beautiful family?
Everyone who walked the path admired his success, and he was very happy.
Sir, we look forward to seeing you and your wife at the next supper club.
Whenever people said such things, the man would thank them graciously, and Good would shine her bright white teeth as Beautiful placed herself just so between her parents.
Oh, no, I'm so sorry.
Every time, they stood there just a moment longer than they needed, as if they were waiting for some imaginary photographer to flatten them into a memory they could give away.
That's okay, little girl. What seems to be the matter?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, True Lobster. We'll transition now to Hannah Hassan, and she'll talk to you about herself and her work.
Yes, that was awesome, y'all. Hi, y'all. I am Hannah Hassan. So the work that I do in the world, the best way that I have learned to package it is threefold. So I am first and foremost and always a poet, a spoken word poet. So I create a lot of custom commissioned pieces that center themes of justice and freedom and home and all of those other things. It's my first love. And I learned in probably around about 2010 that essentially what I was doing through this performance poetry was telling the stories of the people, of the organizations, of the causes that I feel like are showing up in the world and really changing things for our world. So I got at that point really deep into storytelling through sharing very real narratives. And that's kind of another part of the work that I do. I'll get right back to that. But the second part is in storytelling classes and master classes. So I love creating space for people to feel safe and brave enough to unearth and share their own personal narratives in ways that connect groups, that build community, that challenge systems, and all of those good things. That's the second part of my work. And then finally, the third part is in what we'll be talking about today, which is these live storytelling experiences that center around themes of home and gentrification and displacement and belonging and blackness and whiteness and sort of all of the things in between. My goal is very simply to tell the stories, and what people choose to do with them and where they take them is up to them, but I feel like the purpose that's been attached to me is to tell the stories. And one of my shows that I've done pretty a lot of here in Charlotte is called Muddy Turtle Talks. Um, Muddy, Muddy. I learned recently that one of my friends thought I was saying money the whole time. Money does talk, but that's not what it was about. um, there is a neighborhood here in Charlotte, the Enderley Park neighborhood. One of the main thoroughfares that runs through that neighborhood is Tuckasegee. And I learned a couple of years ago that Tuckasegee road is named after the muddy turtle. And so I thought those two themes were really important to explore, mud and themes of like a turtle and what it means. It carries its home on its back and how that can really connect to the people of this community who are facing gentrification and displacement. I partnered with an organization that does work there in the community, Queen City QC family tree. There's a lot of QC families stuff here, but and they asked me to come on as a storyteller in residence and tell the stories of the people. And so what I did was I interviewed people and learned about their lived experiences. I then wrote those stories mostly in monologue form and worked with storytellers throughout the community who would learn the stories. People were not telling their own stories mostly, but volunteer poets and actors and things of that nature. And then they would share them at these live storytelling events. And it's really an interesting experience that you kind of have to experience in order to get the full breadth of why it's important to share stories in this way. But I do this with other communities. I'm working on another community in Charlotte, the Optimist Park community, with UNC Charlotte, and we'll be doing a live showing of stories in the spring. And I do this with many other themes. And one of the shows that I did recently this year was called Weapons of Whiteness. It was in direct response to all of the police killings of unarmed Black people that we have seen happening for years now in this country. I wanted to really explore the true stories of sort of whiteness and how we get here with this racism and discrimination and state sanctioned violence and what's at the bottom of it. And I did that through interviewing white women and hearing their stories about the way that they were raised and the things that they were taught. And then we created a live virtual showing of those stories and stories that Black women told me, or Black men told me about their experiences with police and law enforcement. And those were shared by Black women. So I don't have enough time to talk about all of the different shows and things of that nature, but that's an example of sort of where I'm coming from with my work. And as opposed to pulling a video, because all of my videos are long, I pulled a story to share. This is a story that I wrote after doing an interview for one of the Muddy Turtle Talks events. And it was actually from my own perspective, but this will give you a little bit of an experience of sort of what my style is and the way that I tell stories. I always name my stories and I wait until after it's done to name it. And this one is called She Felt Like Home. Nervous doesn't begin to describe the feeling that I felt when I clicked the green call button on my phone this morning. There was something inside of me that was hoping that she might do what I do so often, which is screen the call when she didn't recognize my number. Maybe she would send me directly to voicemail, and that would give me the chance to leave a message that might compel her to call me back. And that was a scenario that made me feel a little bit more at ease. Yes, every bring that got me closer to voicemail lifted some of the tension bubbling in my chest. But that comfort, it was short lived. Hello? I froze. She answered, hello? At this point, I stumbled my way through an uncomfortable initial greeting. I explained to her that her grandson had given me her number and that I was working on a project that he thought she might be willing to be a part of. I shared that through a unique process that I've coined to be social impact story sharing, that I've created a space for community storytellers to learn and share true stories with a live local audience about topics of importance to the world around us. I told her about all of my background work and all the things that I've done to tell the stories to that point of Charlotte's Enderley Park neighborhood. And I did everything that I could do to assure her that I was a legitimate person and that I would be painless in the conversation and I would protect her anonymity through the process. But she cut me off abruptly. Yes, sweetie, I get it. She spoke with a soft, slow, gentle familiarity that instantly soothed my nerves. I imagined that she held on to that phone with hands lined with waves and wrinkles that told stories of years of holding and raising babies, washing dishes, and baking moist, unforgettable desserts for holidays. As she spoke for a few moments about living in one of Charlotte's most notorious communities, I hung on her every word. Any nervousness and anxiety about asking a stranger for their personal story released itself from my body because I felt like I was speaking to my grandmother. She had that comforting way about her. She felt like home. In that conversation, it was a personal reminder of why this work is so very important. It's a scary thing to experience, asking a person to divulge the most intimate moments of their life to me, a stranger. I'm often afraid, anxious, and concerned that the individual might question my motives or be offended that I'm even reaching out to them. But then I have moments like this morning that remind me that I'm sharing these stories because they change things. This is a real, living, breathing grandmother. If she's anything like my grandma, she's very important to her family. She's the keeper of the family history. She's the physical representation of all of the joy, pain, and everything in between that her family has lived and loved through. She is home to plenty of people, those connected by blood and those that become family along the way. And by sharing her story in this way, she preserves the history of her home, her neighborhood, and her experiences. She reminds the greater Charlotte community of what happens when those stories are not lifted, when those families are not honored, and when these communities are erased. So, nervous or not, I am reminded that I have been assigned a lofty project, interviewing neighbors, writing their stories, and working with storytellers to learn and share these stories is an important part of the process, and I am happy to do it. But watching those true lived experiences come alive on stage, providing an opportunity for stories to expose the very raw truth of systematic erasure, holding space for community members and neighbors, and affirming that their stories won't be ignored and forgotten is a golden opportunity that I am excited to experience and honored to explore. And that's it.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Beautiful job from both of you. Some of the questions I have, I will just ask, and I'll let you guys respond to it as you see fit. We'll start with creativity. Is as the performance of imagination, it's an identity, the identity of the creator. To what extent do you experience the role of the creator as socially constructed, a product and interpreter of or response to a rhetoric and discourse, material and political conditions?
Oh, silence. Oh dear. We had it sort of, yeah, you go.
Okay.
Okay.
So I think that this is a really interesting kind of question to think about, because we work in such close partnership all of the times. And like when we say all of the time, we don't mean like when we're creating art together, we mean like literally all the time. And that the idea of the way that our partnership is like construed by the world doesn't fit the idea of what a creator looks like, right? Like usually it is one kind of individual body who is like doing one thing by themselves. And so we get a lot of questions about like, well, you know, like who is actually doing this piece, or how, like this desire to like parse apart exactly what we're doing. But when we give into that is when we fall apart as a creative partnership. But when we think about that kind of like idea of the Jungian inner world that you're exploring, like what is below the surface of what we project out, when we understand ourselves as interpreters of that space, you know, we talked even in our bio about like we have a shared inner world. And so if we are interpreters of that shared space, there isn't a need to like project an identity out into the world or parse like who's doing what really, because it is the same thing. And we see that privilege functions within that, right? That like usually we see like what does a creator look like? We refer to him as he. We imagine him to have access to a lot of education, and that identity functions, I think, to create this sense that the creator then polices what the world should be, right? Because the creator is then the interpreter of what's happening rather than multiple different expressions of personal experience.
Okay, all right, thank you. Hannah, what would you contribute to that?
Listen, I think that my work is really just about truth. And creativity is a really big part of it. I have to get creative with the way that I not only share the stories that I'm given, but the way that I experience them. But at the root of everything that I do, it's about truth. Like, how do I take these truths? Because here's the thing, like when people share their story with me, I understand that this is their experience, right? Like I can ask a grandmother, the same grandmother in the story that I just shared, about her experience with, I don't know, her home in 1983, and ask her child the same thing, and their experiences will be totally different, right? So I'm finding a way to share truth with the understanding that one person's truth can look very different if you ask the person standing beside them. And I think just really exploring truth through the lens of stories in this way, it's unique. It challenges me in ways every time that I don't experience, that I don't plan on being challenged, but it happens. Um, I don't know. I'm not sure if that fully answers your question, but I was just thinking solely about like what's at the root of what we're doing here.
Right.
And for me, it's truth telling in ways that they have to remain true to the person who shared their experience with me. And I still have to consider an audience that needs to digest and experience what I'm sharing with them. So there's a balance.
Indeed. Okay. No, thank you. Now, what you were saying there about your storytellers being purveyors of truth, it sounds very similar to what in the Jungian tradition, they would talk about the role of the hero. And the role of the hero is one who is a bearer of consciousness, right? A bearer of consciousness to the extent that a particular community or society or culture can recognize it and ultimately benefit from it through that person's experiences, that person's sacrifices even. So how would you explain the role of the hero in that sense to your collaborators, your storytellers, those who you feature in your work, and how do you think they would respond to it, Hannah?
I think that in general, in the communities that I typically work with, just the concept of hero is one that's foreign to them. And because oftentimes that platform has never been given to exist as the hero in the story, right? So there's that underlying thing that I usually spend a lot of time caring for when I am listening to folks and when I'm writing the story. And then when I pass it on to the storyteller. So with the way that I do work, there are these transfers of energy, right? It's from the person who shares their story with me to me. And then from me to the paper after I write it, or sometimes other storytellers might write them, but then also on to the person who shares the story. So like I would submit that oftentimes the hero's journey is within the story and the different sort of journeys that it takes throughout as it takes these sort of stages from the person that it comes from through the actor or the storyteller. And so, in and of itself, I mean, this sounds like really sort of pie in the sky, but like the story is the hero.
Wow.
And I think if oftentimes the people, um, even the people who share their stories with me, are able to separate sort of themselves as the hero away from what the story means and what it will mean for the people who receive it, it's that much better, because all of these experiences that we have here on earth are shared experiences, right? There's just really nothing, no, there's not an experience that someone else can have that hasn't been had before. That's what, to me, that's sort of the sweet spot that exists within these stories.
I see. Well, thank you. Thank you. True Lobster, what would you add to that?
I think that we work on the opposite end of that. You know, like if it's a coin, Hannah's is facing one way with like the empowerment of the hero and how we can kind of reimagine and reassign that role. And True Lobster works with the other story, or the other side, which is people who have like traditionally been born into this hero narrative. So like they've always felt that this was a story to claim for themselves, kind of even without criticism, right? Like this story exists and I just kind of live through it.
Propel it.
And propel it and perpetuate it forward, right? And so our goal in our work is to kind of deconstruct what it means to be a hero, and that to ask ourselves, like, is this hero's journey something that we should really be going on, or should we have some more kind of self-awareness and follow a different journey, which in our lens means rejecting that narrative and usually sitting in a space of storytelling and contradiction, where you're kind of talking about experiences, you're talking about moments, but there isn't ever like a clear, I would say, like, here's where we learned the lesson and now it's fixed, right?
Yeah. No, I'm with you.
Yeah, because that natural ending, I think, gives this false sense of resolution, right? You know, like even if the problem is that we're taking on inequity, and if I still follow that hero's journey, I'm like, well, I worked really hard and I did these 6 things and then I hit the top and then I fixed it. Like that's not how that works. And so, yeah, I think we conceptualize hero in the opposite direction.
Okay, so one thing it sounds like you're articulating there is the idea that the notion of an individual bearing the consciousness of an entire culture, or even conceivably informing that culture with the uniqueness or the power of, like you said, traditionally his, but also her way of thinking and his or her suffering and struggle and all of that is outdated to a certain extent. And you're saying that in the postmodern world, for example, that needs to be, as you said, deconstructed to be more of a collaborative, communal, relational sort of endeavor, and how that connects in a way to what Hannah said, and it was not just in a way, but fundamentally connects, it sounds, is that she's saying that the story itself is the hero. So no longer is the hero sort of located within the narrative as someone who drives and focuses, or is sort of the locus of the consciousness that the story represents. She said that the story itself is the narrative. I mean, is the narrative itself is the hero, or the heroic energy or form or paradigm. And it sounds like True Lobster is saying that by offering the hero as an individual is sort of a false false in the sense of strategically, structurally false front there to say, okay, we're offering you the traditional European idea of the hero, and we're saying, and through the process of the story, we're breaking that down and offering up these alternatives for what heroism ultimately can be, maybe even should be, to the audience that participates in the narrative by way of being an audience. Am I anywhere close to getting that?
Yeah. Head nods all around.
Okay. All right. Okay, no, it's beautiful talking to you guys. So privilege can work two ways. In a sense, we've been talking here about the notion of privilege as embodied in the idea of the hero. You know, what is to be privileged? The concept of the individual or the narrative within which the individual is created or construed. On one hand, it defends, but when you think about it socially, on one hand, privilege defends and sustains egoic awareness. It perpetuates one's resistance to and acknowledgement of coming to terms with the self, which is the archetype that Jung and the Jungians perceive as the sum or totality of human potential and or experiences. On the other hand, privilege would be the leisure to pursue engagement with the self. And Jungian therapy, for example, it may be very helpful, but it's typically quite expensive and inaccessible to many, if not most people. So how would you describe the role of privilege in your work? Starting now with True Lobster again.
Mother of pearl. I think for us, it's, I think Our Daughter Monster in particular is the story of privilege. And so it's the idea that like, privilege is to be born into a story that gives you access to power. It's to be born into that, and then you can choose to an extent, I mean, obviously, but to accept or reject that, and to work within that story and work within that access, or to bucket and
create your own new world.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. No, thank you. Thank you very much. Were you finished? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to intrude.
Oh, yes. No, be long-winded. No, sir.
All right, Hannah, please go ahead.
Yeah, so privilege in my storytelling, it shows up obviously in the stories that are told in many different ways. Like it's anytime that we're looking at ideas and thoughts of like race and racism and things like gentrification and police brutality, we're on a very broad level and also like straight to the core level, discussing privilege and the ways that it shows up in our society. But when I think about privilege and my storytelling, I think about it more in the way that somehow I have developed an audience that when we look at sort of demographics, exist in many different intersections in places of extreme privilege. And I think a lot of the folks who follow my work would agree that that's where they stand. And I don't know where it came from or how it came or whatever, but I believe that that you get the audience that you get, and I'm glad to have the folks who show up and experience my work to show up and experience my work. But I think when I think about my stories and the way that I share them, and typically the outcome of how it hits people and it impacts people, is the stories that they hear and experience really do a lot of internal work of having the audience really question this thought of privilege and how it shows up in their lives and the different ways that they benefit, and how they can take a look at that privilege that they hold on to and use it as a power to, and I want to be clear, like the stories that I share of the folks in some of these communities and things of that nature, they're not all through the lens of trauma, right? Really, my stories are resilience informed, right? So I don't need for my audience to hear and experience the stories and think about what they need to do to save anyone. I need for them to be able to consider their privilege and now how they use that to exist in this world in a way that really impacts things.
Okay.
So I don't necessarily approach my storytelling through the lens of like, let's look at privilege. It shows up more, I think, in the receiving of my stories.
Okay. Okay. Well, since privilege, if you on a binary of presence and absence, which I think the Derridians would say defines binaries throughout our cultural, social binaries and such, right? Privilege is on the side of presence, okay, and you both have talked about that and how you deal with presence in your work and what the implications of that are socially and politically and historically. How would you discuss the role of absence in your work? How do you acknowledge it in your work, and how do you struggle with it, Hannah? Start with you now.
Wow. How do we discuss the role of absence in my work?
Or even just imply it. Yeah. Just.
I think that more so than anything, it's implied.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say that you understand just in a very sort of basic way who's in the picture and in the story, and what's in the picture and in the story, and then what's not there.
Okay. Okay, go ahead. Will you elaborate on that a little bit? I'm just giddy with this. Go ahead. This is.
I like the word giddy. I think so. A good example of that would be in the stories that I collected and shared for the Weapons of Whiteness.
Okay.
The goal was not to, like write a bunch of stories that, especially the ones that came from the perspective of the white women that I interviewed, that would, just be like, and this is when my daddy walked into the room and called, my boyfriend the N-word, and that type of thing. Yeah. It was more about the discussions about politeness and about the way that our family does things, and when we look at like those stories, we think about what's missing here or what is present here. Like it's not necessarily always, and I think that's where I find inspiration from True Lobster's work in their writing. Literally, you could take their piece and pare it down and look at it as some type of childhood play or something like that, if you weren't really thinking and experiencing and feeling the absence of what's not there, but also the presence of what is there.
Right.
And oftentimes for me, my style is that's not it. It's very just straightforward, like what you get, and like I'm gonna tell you who's in the room and who's not, and that kind of thing. But there's always this prevailing thing of like, but what's really happening here?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what shapes what's happening there, obviously, is what you're saying. I thank you so much for sharing that with us about, part of what shapes and defines and accentuates what's happening is what's not. Mm-hmm. Indeed. True Lobster, what would you add to that?
Well, I suppose with our specific creative work, there is the absence of a father. And we didn't really intentionally do that, I don't think.
No, I think that we did. I think we decided, because in a draft, 26 or however many drafts ago it was, the father figure was there. And then we realized how remarkably unnecessary it was. I don't actually care about that face. So in a literal sense, we removed that. I don't know that it's necessarily an absence, because that the mother figure sort of carries that sort of patriarchal narrative through in a way that perpetuates. But like, I think our partnership is like a direct response to absence in both of our individual experiences. I mean, you good? Okay. So we have this sort of, oh God, how do I say this? Words. Okay, I have to be explicit. For me, I have a learning disability. And so that, by the way, Georgia Public Schools did not acknowledge, but it's fine. I'm not bitter. Anyway, but I have a learning disability that makes the words really difficult for me to find. And so the time it takes for me to articulate in certain situations, it doesn't necessarily represent the internal yada, yada, yadas. This one, super great with the words and the internal tickings and et cetera, and that is her strong suit. However, she has a physical disability. And so our partnership kind of came about on one of the many levels from the absence of those strengths and those lacks, or the presence of those lacks in a certain sense.
Yeah, I think that our partnership is a model of like because I think that we often don't think about, when we talk about privilege, how strongly ability influences the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And that like, even when we're talking about lacks of privilege, and sometimes even when we're talking about people with disabilities, we don't necessarily, we either try to integrate disability as a detail in the narrative of like ability or that like hero's journey, or we try to ignore it altogether. And so I think our kind of question on our use of absence is like, how can we kind of mold into each other's absence, right? So like, if I am not able to physically get somewhere or do something, but she is, or if she's articulating something that she told me last night, but it's not like, that's not happening in this moment, that doesn't mean that it's my thought because I'm the one presenting it, or that she's doing the thing that I couldn't get up and do, but that we are both supporting each other in a way that I think is very intimate and different from the way that most relationships function. So I think absence informs a lot of the way that our work is created, which then influences what it looks like, right? We don't have a hero because it can't be one person. So now we've got a deconstructed narrative.
Okay, indeed. No, thank you very much. So we've got about 10 minutes left. We've covered 3 of the questions I have for you guys. But we can take these last 10 minutes and consider some questions from our audience, if they have any, and they are welcome.
I think I have enabled it for the audience members to unmute yourself, but you can also put questions in the chat if you don't want to voice them, and I can voice them for you.
What's True Lobster going to do next? How can we follow your next work?
Unmute. Okay, I can use technology. Hi, Kathy.
Hey.
I would, just on a personal note, I would love to sit in a room when you and Copeland have a conversation, just for the record.
That would be a blast.
Yes, I would be wonderful. So I think Cameron has the ability to share a link in the chat for how you can sign up to get notified about the audio version of I Daughter Monster. It should be out January. We're very excited about finishing it. I have gained so many gray hairs working on it and transitioning my theatrical being into a tiny little microphone. But yeah, there should be a link in the chat where you can find out about that. Or we're also on Instagram and Spacebooks. And we also have if ever live theater happens again, we have a monthly newsletter where we contextualize and critique Charlotte area theatrical productions and put them sort of in conversation with each other. Obviously, that hasn't happened in a year because of the COVIDs, but that is a thing that folks can do.
Or could we see some? It was such a small taste. It was wonderful, but I'd love to see more of what we got tonight. Is there any kind of plan for that to be, for us to get a little more?
We have another teaser that we are putting a score to that we'll release on Instagram soon.
Okay, I follow you all there. I've got all those. So
We'll personally update you.
Yes, I will send you the whole thing, Kathy.
Can I pose that same question to Hannah? Where can we see your work next?
Yeah, so I have tomorrow night a show coming up, a virtual showing of stories. These are from students that I've worked with all semester at UNC Charlotte. And they will be sharing their own sort of stories through poetry, spoken word letters, all that type of stuff. My events are always at this point live on Facebook. They'll be on YouTube as well. But if anybody wants to connect with me, if they just type my name into any of the spaces, I'm there, and I always post about the things that I have coming up.
We have a question from the audience dealing with the name True Lobster and where it comes from. You guys, what's the significance of that?
Yeah, we accidentally manifested ourselves.
Yeah.
One time.
God, Lord Jesus. All right. So we met as a part of another ensemble in town. And right as that relationship was starting to kind of devolve, we were recording, oddly enough, an audio track for one of the members. And one of the parts of the audio track was saying True Lobster.
For 4 minutes
nonstop, just continuously together, and someone took a picture of us, and we just happened to be
holding hands, saying,
but like
lobster.
in like a weird sort of lobster, and it stuck. It came out of a weird traumatic event, and it's thanks, Justin.
Okay, all right. Let's see, Hannah. Someone wants to know. Wants to hear actually more about the resilience in your storytelling. What would you have?
So I tell stories mostly about the Black experience, because I believe that those are the stories that need to be shared and lifted and loved on. And oftentimes when we experience Black stories, they are about our pain. And when we think about real stories, because I tell people's true lived experiences, our pain on display is not for everybody, right? And I can't control who's in my audiences. So though people share with me some moments of deep difficulty and pain and sometimes the most difficult moments of their lives, losing their homes, losing family members, experiences. I have a show called Black Mama Endangered that's all stories about Black women and their experiences with hospitals and doctors and things of that nature, and the fact that we're not believed when we say something is wrong and that kind of thing. I am tasked with telling stories that are difficult for me to hear, and difficult for the people who've shared them with me to experience, but I want to create a show, create a production based around the fact that the human spirit is resilient, and that our people specifically have had everything that can be thrown at a person, at a family, at a people thrown at them, and still we are. And still we rise, and still we are here. So I remember that when I am crafting stories and when I'm creating shows and trying to produce an experience, that I'm not interested in just sharing our pain. I am interested in sharing our truths in a way that show that we made it through this and we'll make it through the next thing. And also, like, we don't always have to be in a space of making it through. Like, you know, we're pretty amazing and awesome people and stuff as well too. Like, I love us, and so I want for people to see the beauty of us even through some of the darker moments.
All right, thank you very much. We have a question from another audience member. What challenges have both groups, True Lobster and Hannah, what challenges have you found in the creative process during this pandemic? Talk about difficult times.
I guess I can go first. I've told this story quite a bit now that I was standing in my kitchen on the stay-home orders came in Charlotte, and it started on a Monday. And by Friday, I was standing in my kitchen cooking, and I got an email, and that was the last email of confirmation that everything that I had been booked for, planned for this year had been canceled or postponed indefinitely. And I that's a mile marker for me because I remember thinking like, what? What am I going to do? And so the biggest challenge for me has been in turning down all of the internal things that come through my heart, my mind, and my spirit when I think about like the fact that I've had to rebuild everything that I do to fit a virtual world, to reach people in a different way. It's the biggest challenge that I've had is me. It's like I quit my job 2 years ago and decided that I was going to do this type of thing for a living, and I had it with a plan based on the fact that there was not a global pandemic. Mm-hmm. Right. And then here I am face to face with now my own resilience and figuring out what that story is and what it looks like. And that has been the biggest challenge for me. And I'm sure it's been a challenge for a lot of other artists and creatives.
Okay, thank you. True Lobster, what would you add to that?
Same, yeah, ditto. I think the pandemic hit us in a particularly odd sort of time because it was right after my world in particular was shattered entirely. And so pandemic, I was like, okay, yeah, great, cool, more trauma, that's fine. So I think we were in like we're already in a place when it started.
Our experience is, I think, inherently different because we both have full-time jobs that are not doing this. And she works at a grocery store and I'm a teacher. So in pandemic world, I think those two things.
Yeah, there's been a lot of like, Maslow's hierarchy of needs or whatever, like just as far as like survival is concerned, both for like, your physical safety and then, financial safety is concerned. Yeah. So the finding the bandwidth to honor the parts of us that exist in partnership because our work is created together. And so finding the bandwidth to make the space and make a safe space where that can happen has been impossible. And then finding the like personal bandwidth for each of us to, navigate, full-time day jobs and the world falling apart, finding enough strength to have the will to like make art and that leisure or that privilege to sort of exist in those spaces has been exceedingly difficult.
Yeah, I think we're both in a position where we see just the kind of incredible impact of what this pandemic, but also then the reverberations of it have done to individual lives of people who don't usually engage with art, that like art wasn't something that they thought about. And so I think that there is this dichotomy that, we have this really lovely conversation about the power of the story as the hero, And then I think we're both, then, you turn around and during the day you're faced with people who need food.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to be like, how do I like turn off the person that needs food to think about what the hero's journey is? But those two things feed into each other and there's no real way to separate them. And I think we've been living in that just like impossible kind of space that feels chaotic and confusing, and trying to remember that it's not the other person's fault that
everything
happened.
is so hard.
And that is, in fact, the hero's journey, right? And that's where your work and Hannah's work come together beautifully. On a beautiful place for closing. At this point, we thank you all for being a part of this part of the journey of these obviously brilliant and accomplished artists. And I am just honored to have been able to play the small part in helping bring their experiences to you. And I'll switch back now to Cameron. You can tell us everything we need to know.
Troy, I am honored to have shared space with you. And I think this was a really exciting and valuable conversation. And I appreciate you leading it. And Hannah and True Lobster, I am so honored to have shared this virtual stage with you this evening as well. Can we all do one more like sign language round of applause for this goodness? Thank you. So much participation. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for being here. We are Boom. This is our 4th forum, and we're just really grateful to have this conversation and to find ways to connect intimately in this virtual way. I do want to say thank you one more time to our sponsors, our funders, Knight Foundation, Ream Prize Fund, Foundation for the Carolinas, United Way of Central Carolinas, North Carolina Arts Council, and the ASC, the Arts and Science Council here in Charlotte. And I know that everyone wants to stay connected with these amazing artists. So let me share this screen that has their contact information, and then I will also drop it back in the chat so you can grab it before you head out. But thank you for cutting out, creating time in your own lives to have this conversation. And if you have any follow-up questions, I'm happy to, see if I can get these lovely, amazing artists to answer it and follow up in an email. So, or just stay connected with them individually. So thank you all for being here. Thanks so much for joining us. Please come back to another Boom event and share in art making in a crazy time. Thanks so much, everyone.